Welcome to the presentation, Supporting Families with PBIS at Home. This presentation is brought to you by the West Virginia Behavior Mental Health Technical Assistance Center. The center is made possible by a collaboration between the West Virginia Autism Training Center at Marshall University and the West Virginia Department of Education's Office of Special Education and Student Support. The content for this presentation is based on the practice brief released by the Center on Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports. This brief can be found at www.pbis.org. The presenter for today's session is Alicia Zeman, coordinator for the West Virginia School-Wide PBIS project.
I want to thank everybody for attending. I can see that we have 87 participants right now, and that is impressive. This is actually the second in a series of webinars that we are putting out. Don't panic if you did not see the first one. We actually chose a very, very small cohort of our academies that are coming through PBIS in 2020 to start, because we were very brand new to Zoom, and we wanted to make sure that we were putting out quality content and knew how to operate this platform before we started inviting a larger audience. That first webinar was based on how to make a matrix for distance learning or remote learning. It was recorded on Tuesday, and we do have that link to be ready to send out to the same listserv that this invite came from. So be looking for that. We're also hoping that it will be linked on the Department of Ed's COVID-19 response website, so you'll be able to find that there as well. But that information should be coming out this afternoon. We appreciate you taking your time to be with us today. We know that we are in unprecedented times when it comes to education, and I can tell you, for those of you who don't know, my name is Alicia Zeman, and I'm the PBIS coordinator at the West Virginia Behavior Mental Health Technical Assistance Center. We have been waiting to be able to provide support to you all. We know, just like you, that first week everybody was in shock. The second week we were trying to figure out how to set up learning without being in a school building. And then from at least our perspective, that's when we started to hear questions about how can we do what we know about PBIS in this new world that we're living in. So we have been waiting to support you. We knew that you were overwhelmed, and the last thing you needed is more information. I know that first 2 weeks, it was webinar, 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 and here's free resources, more free resources, more free resources. And we wanted to join in, but we wanted to make sure our timing was right for your ability to take on new information. In our last webinar that we did talk about making a matrix, thinking about how you make your matrix in your PBIS school. Maybe you use the expectations of be safe, be respectful, be responsible. And then we were talking about how we can shift that over to this virtual world that we're now teaching in for this amount of time that we are in the middle of social distancing. That first webinar was based off of a brief that was put out by the Center on PBIS. And you can access that brief at pbis.org, and it's called Making Matrices for Remote Learning. We did this webinar in a similar vein. They have a practice brief out about supporting families with PBIS at home. It looks like this. And it was put out by the Center on PBIS and in partnership with the Center for Parent Information and Resources. What we really encourage you to do is to go to this link and print off or read this brief in full. It's only about 8 pages. It's a really easy read. There's lots of graphs and there's lots of visuals in there as well. But we decided that this was really solid content, but we know one of the best ways to really begin to understand really solid content is to have the ability to talk about it with somebody. And so we use this as our foundation document for this webinar that we're doing. And so we encourage you to go to that link, and we'll send that link out as well when this recording comes out. So why do we even need to talk about supporting our parents with PBIS at home. And I think that's an interesting conversation to have. Number one, really right now, our parents are our most important stakeholders in what we're trying to accomplish. And the important part of that is that our parents are never expected to be in that position to be the most important stakeholder for what we're trying to accomplish right now. And I think we need to keep in mind that this is hard. What we're doing, what our parents are doing, what we're asking our kids to do is very hard, and it's something that we've never done before. And when we talked about making matrices for distance remote learning earlier this week and last week, what we really were talking about is bringing what was familiar to our kids and bringing it into this new world that we're living in. And we're kind of trying to do the same thing by bringing PBIS into our homes. I know that PBIS is my world. I'm a behavior-minded person. I'm a teacher by trade. A lot of this comes naturally to me, and some days are pretty at my house and some days are not pretty at my house. And we have had PBIS at home established here for well over a year, but we've really had to go back and really look at what our expectations are at home, what our rules and routines look like, and we've really had to evaluate that for the situation that we are in now, where everybody's working from home. We're here all the time. My son is trying to learn. I'm trying to work. My husband's trying to work. So we really had to evaluate that. And I'm saying that this is hard, having experience working through this. I can't even imagine how it feels to some other individuals or other parents who don't have kind of the mindset that we have or haven't had the experience with it. So really, it's about building a foundation and trying to teach our parents about ways that they can make this easier for them while we are in this period of social distancing. The first thing that we really need to talk about, and the first thing that's talked about in the practice brief, is the importance of setting routines. When we talk about setting routines, we talk about setting routines in schools all the time because we know that kids crave consistency, routine, and structure. Now, if you ask a kid, do you crave consistency, routine, and structure? They would tell you, no, I don't like that. But what we know as teachers, what we know as educators is that when we provide environments that are consistent, nurturing, responsive, and safe, and we do that by being consistent and having routine and structure, our kids function better. And so that's what we're trying to share with our parents. And really, that's the goal of this webinar, is how can you take this information and find ways to provide kind of scaffolding to your parents so they can have more successful environments in their home. So that's the first secret I would share with our parents. Kids crave consistency, routine, and structure. It makes them feel safe when they have those things in their environment. Routines are familiar. We've got to remember our kids, even from our pre-Kers all the way up to our high schoolers, have been in schools where they have gone through the same routines. And routines are familiar. And right now, I don't know, I love things that feel familiar at this moment in time. And I know our kids will too. There's a couple quotes from that brief that I wanted to point out. Really, when we have a lack of routine, this leads to anxiety and challenging behaviors. So if we are not providing an environment for them that doesn't have some sort of routine and structure, and then we're seeing challenging behavior come out of that, we've got to kind of go back and look at the root cause about why that might be happening. Routine, right now, we know we're in this unprecedented time, and I know that we're all functioning in this kind of space of uncertainty. What routine does is it allows you to have your brain to have that certainty of, I know this is what I'm going to do throughout the day, and this is the order that I'm going to do that. The more consistent routines and schedules can be, the easier it will be to support pro-social behavior and prevent challenging behaviors in the home. And it seems kind of counterintuitive probably to a lot of people, because we think we'll just let them be. They'll fill their own time. We're stressed, they're stressed. We're going to, they don't need me to set up routines and schedules for them, but they absolutely do, because that's the most reassuring thing for our kids right now. With that, I will add that there needs to be some flexibility to them. I feel like we are, and I said this in the last webinar, but I feel like we are all really operating at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy right now. We're all in that survival mode of trying to figure out what's happening, how we're safe, where we're getting our food, all of those things, everything's changed from the normal, and we are now in a new normal. So routines are important. The schedule is important, but we need to be looking at those with grace as well. Because if my 8-year-old looks at me and says, I just can't do it today, which he at times has said that, I have to have the grace to say, okay, how can we make this better at this moment? Here are some examples, and this is coming from that PBIS brief from the Center on PBIS as well. This is some examples of elementary routines and secondary routines. I think one of the things I noticed about this is that there's not times on it. I was a pre-K teacher for many, many years, and I was in the classroom, and whenever I would have a substitute, I would often say, the only times that are the most important is that you've got to get to lunch on time and you got to get them to the bus on time. But the most important thing for my substitutes were that they did everything in the same order. So if it took a little longer or took a little less, that had my blessing. But what my pre-Kers needed for that reassurance to not have anxiety about what was happening is that things happened in the same order. And I think that's what we need to look for in our days when we're asking or teaching our parents about how to set up routines in their home, is to think about what's the natural order of your day and how can we make sure that things are going in the same order. So from the time this really started, we set up a schedule similar to this in our house, where I didn't put this was the time from 8 to 8:30 we're going to have breakfast and a movie or show. What we did was we cut out the different things that we needed to have within our day, and then we would allow him to put it in the order that he would want. So the night before, he would put these in the order of what the next day was going to look like. And this was really good for him because it gave him choice. We know choice is really powerful for our kids. It makes them feel like they have control over something, but it also allowed him to go to bed knowing what his next day was going to look like. And some days it went really well and it looked exactly like what was on our wall, and other days we needed more outside time or we needed more movement time, or man, he really wanted to watch the next movie in that series, and we were flexible with that and had great grace with that. But we needed to make sure that our academics were done. We needed to make sure that we were having time to move. We got to make sure that we're being fed. So that's an example of how that's being used in my house. And we don't really now, I mean, we're on day 32, 33 of being home here at my house. We don't refer to this as much. We're kind of just in a groove, but our days do look the same routine wise about where he's at and how we're going through our day. Of course, if you have secondary kids, it's going to look a little bit differently for them. I know that I have friends who have teenagers and their teenagers aren't waking up till later in the morning, and that's fine. But what are the things that we have to get done during the day? We have to get our distance learning done. We have to have some exercise in our day. You have to have teenagers more than anybody. And even my 8-year-old, they have to have some social connection outside of what's just happening in this house. So really allowing our families and teaching our families to think about what's important, and then let's put it in an order that works for us, so it's not a free-for-all all the time. And that's really beneficial to our students. There's some free activities at the bottom of this, and if you would go to that link and download the brief, you could click on those. There's lots of examples for structured schedules. They're even floating around on social media. Khan Academy has some, Scholastic has some, the PBIS websites all have some ideas. I can't talk enough about that need for social connection, and there's a slide about that in the end of this webinar, but our kids are still needing social connection, and it's really important for them to be able to have somebody to talk to. We just had our second one set up a Zoom meeting for my son and his friends. And yesterday they spent some time finding it funny to show each other their feet on the camera and to laugh with one another, but they would intermittently say, "Is everybody okay? What have you been doing? Are your families okay?" And then they would do something else silly, and then they would say, "When do you think this will end? Do you think we'll go back to school? And who's missing school?" It was very, very cathartic for them, almost like therapy for them. And I found it interesting how much they needed to hear from age-appropriate, peers, age-related peers, how they're viewing this, and that it was more powerful for my son to be able to talk to his friends through that than it was for, not saying that it's not powerful when he's talking to us or to his family members, but he really needed that social connection with his friends. The second thing we need to encourage our parents to do is to set up home expectations. We do this in the form of a family meeting. We'll call a family meeting and say, 5 o'clock on Tuesday, let's have a family meeting. Now, maybe that's not the best for everybody, but when we talk about expectations, we really need to think about what characteristics you want to see from your family and what behaviors show their understanding of those behaviors. So when we think about the matrices that we set up for our school, we often as a staff work together to define what our expectations are going to be. What is our ideal student? What do we want our students here to be when they're here at school? And it's often things like be respectful, be responsible, be kind, be safe, along those lines. And then from there, we define for them the expectations or the little rules. So we are safe in the bathroom by making sure we don't get water on the floor, or we're safe in the hallway by walking. We're very clear for them. And that's the same thing that we're asking or going to teach our parents to do. So at home, we're going to have conversations about what our values are or what characteristics we want to see in our home. And then we're going to define different areas of our home life that maybe are the most drama inducing or that need more support. And then we're going to talk about what behaviors show those characteristics in our home environment. And when we're teaching this to our families, and that's really what we're asking you to do, think about ways how we can share this with families. Maybe it's quick little videos, maybe it's quick little shout outs or little something that you can send home, maybe through the mail for the parents to have an idea about how they can have a PBIS system in their home. But when we make our matrix at school, we make it from staff discussions, we make it from data. What they're going to do is have staff discussions, family discussions. They can evaluate when the most drama occurs in their homes, and really start to evaluate what their values are. And keeping it simple is the best way. We don't want anybody to overwhelm them. So 3 to 5, just the same rules, 3 to 5 expectations that we have in school. Keeping it simple for our kids, keeping it simple so when we need to teach it to our kids, it's simple for us to explain, and keeping it simple so we're not overwhelming anybody with the expectations that we're making. So this is from the PBIS brief, but at the top is a school example. They have be respectful, be responsible, be safe. And you can see where it's broken down into those common areas where kids are. And it tells them specifically what they're going to do to be respectful in the classroom. What's a way you can be responsible in the classroom? What's a way to be safe in the classroom? When we're transferring this to home, we've got to think about environments of the home, of course, that are common areas or that where we need to have expectations for them. So if your school uses be respectful, be responsible, be safe, that would be a great home school connection if parents would like to adopt that as well. And then what the parents need to do, and maybe with the support of their teachers or of their PBIS team at school, we can talk about what it looks like to be respectful in a virtual classroom. We can talk about what it looks like to be responsible at mealtime, and we can talk about what it feels like to be safe at bedtime. So same concept, we're just shifting it over to a different environment. We have to remember we're shifting it over to a different environment with a lot of stakeholders that this isn't their common language. So we're going to have to take some time to show them these examples and teach them ways of thinking about rules and expectations within their home and really getting their buy-in about why it's important to do that and how it benefits their kids. This is an example of the big matrix from Lost Creek Elementary, at least from when I was there. It's big. We put a lot of thought in it, but we were having 200 kids that we needed to make sure that they were understanding what these different expectations look like in different environments. Here's an example of a matrix that I have in my own house. We use these and we use these to really work with Noah is my son's name, about how we wanted to be safe, be respectful, be responsible, and we added be excellent. And this was actually taken a picture of the matrix that's in our bathroom. So I had highlighted about which of those little rules needed to take place in the bathroom. Also, you can see where I wrote in not hurting self or others. That's not stated positively, and I'm pretty sure that happened on a not best behavior day at my house, because those happen to everybody. But that kind of idea of being able to organize that in a way so he knows what's being expected of him. We can't expect kids, and I'm going to assume that you all know this, we can't expect kids to do things that we haven't taught to them. And that's the same premise that we're going to take into our homes. It goes right along with this quote. If you want it, you must teach it. And then when you see it, you must acknowledge it. If you've been in our trainings, pretty much any of our trainings, you've heard us state this quote. It's kind of the mantra of PBIS. And that's one of the things that we need to be almost setting up and teaching to our parents right now, is that if we're wanting to see certain behavior, we must be taking the time to letting them know. We must be taking the time to teach it to them. And then we must be taking the time to sit to acknowledge it. And by acknowledging it, I don't mean taking, material things or setting up a school store in your home or any of that stuff, but just saying, hey, buddy, I really appreciate how you got to bed last night and you didn't jump on it. That was being safe. Great job. And that can do a lot for a kid to be able to mold their behavior into what we are wanting to see. I like this as a way to teach parents about what we're talking about when we talk about teach, remind, and reward with positive feedback, because this is second nature to a lot of us, but for our parents, it probably is not second nature. So this is really telling them how. If you've chosen be respectful, this is how you teach being respectful in your house. And this is an example of how you would remind a student about being respectful. And this is an example of how you could reward with positive feedback. Let's look at that remind under be respectful. It says at the start of the day and each new activity where kind language is expected, remind kids to be kind. For example, playing games together is fun, and let's remember to be kind with our words. So that's actually giving a script to our parents about ways that they can, what we would consider pre-correct behavior before they're entering into an activity. Something that is second nature to us, but something that we might find that we need to be teaching to our parents as a almost proactive way of handling behaviors. The other thing is, and I thought these suggestions from the Center on PBIS were very, very powerful about how we can correct behavior. I think that we are often, the way we correct behavior varies from person to person to person anyway, but really having some quick suggestions of, if you've set the foundation of what the expectations are in your house, we have to assume that kids will make mistakes. They're just going to, because that's what kids do. We also need to remember that how they're corrected is important, and that redirection is actually what works best. So yelling at them, any other forms of correction, redirecting is what's really going to change the behavior most quickly. The 4 suggestions that come from the Center on PBIS include, the first step is to quickly correct or signal the error. So simply being like, hey buddy, that wasn't being respectful. The second step is to restate the expected behavior. And so that might sound like, hey man, I heard those words that you were just using. Remember, in this house, we use kind words or gentle words, and that's how we show that we're being respectful. Provide an opportunity for positive interaction, and really what they're asking is that the kid gets a chance to try again, to try to do it the right way again. So think about those times we have kids in the hallway that are running like they're trying to win the 100-yard dash down the hallway, and we stop and we're like, hey buddy, are you being safe? What kind of feet do we have in the hallway? And you see walking feet, and you say, hey, go show me how you walk down the hallway. So that opportunity to practice to do it right. And that's really where the power is in correcting behavior, because they have the opportunity to get a feel of what it feels like, what it sounds like, what it is like to do to meet the expectation that we have set for them. And then ending that with the chance to have a positive feedback. Hey, that's right. Those are positive. Those are walking feet. I really appreciate that. I can tell you that that's not second nature to me when things are challenging, but having that written down in 4 steps, these are the 4 things I need to do to correct behavior, has made a difference even in the last few days as I've been building these presentations, because it allows me not to react from emotion. It allows me to react from 4 steps I know that are a better way of correcting behavior. This quote says, the goal is for a correction or redirection to be calm, brief, and provide the opportunity for the child to practice the desired behavior. And that's when we begin to see behavior change, when they have the opportunity to practice, and it begins to become automatic to them of what the desired behavior should be. Some other things that help, we know that the more positive the environment is, the better it is for everybody. So we would want to have that 5-to-1 ratio. We want to have more positive interactions than negative interactions throughout our day. They suggest reminding instead of correcting. So instead of just calling out the behavior for the misbehavior, to remind them, instead of saying, I can't believe you're doing that, get off the couch, looking at them and saying, remember that we sit on our bottoms on the couch, and seeing that their behavior changes. Teaching them alternatives. Our kids are stressed right now just as much as we are. And with that stress is going to come behaviors, and teaching them alternatives to misbehaviors, alternatives that are more safe or more healthy, is something that I think we all need to concentrate on. So like, if your child is having a huge meltdown over their work, and now they're throwing their pencil or they're throwing whatever, teaching them that that's not acceptable, but maybe we can punch this pillow that's on the couch, or asking them, or begin to teach them that when they feel like they can't sit still anymore, that maybe we could go for a walk, or just teaching them alternatives that are more healthy and more safe for the needs that they're having. And then visuals. Part of it is the pre-K teacher in me, but there's lots of visuals around this house, especially with things that my son struggles with. So sometimes he struggles, or he was struggling with remembering to take his glasses to school and to brush his teeth in the morning. So I made a simple visual. I made it on the computer, but I could have very easily just drawn it or wrote on any piece of paper, and it's hanging in my bathroom that says, remember your glasses and remember to brush your teeth, with a funny picture on it. And that really within a few days changed his responsibility level, because he had that visual to remind him. And then the responsibility was off of me, because I knew that I taught that visual to him, and that visual was cueing him instead of me. We also have to think about how we're going to handle our kids' questions, because there's lots of questions right now. And I think we know that kids pick up on how we're handling situations, but sometimes we need to make sure that they are having the ability to ask somebody their questions, even if it's via email to teachers or to the counselor, if they're not in an environment where they feel like they can ask questions of reassurance in their home environment. Some of the suggestions that came from the brief is making sure that, number one, our information is coming from trusted sources. As we know, not everything we read on social media is the truth or the best point of view. So making sure that we have, and it's hard to do at this time because it seems like the information is changing from moment to moment to moment, but making sure that at least the information that we're sharing with our kids is coming from trusted sources, that we're answering their questions with age-appropriate answers. So it's always been my policy when I was in the classroom, and even now, I always give the least amount of information that is acceptable to them. So I don't want to give them more than they can handle, because it's very easy to do that. So I start very simply by answering their questions, and as they ask me questions, I will answer those questions for them, but I try not to give them too much. And it's important that we answer it in age-appropriate ways. And then what they really need is constantly to be reminded that we're making the efforts to have them stay safe. I have a friend that I was talking to that her daughter is constantly playing with her stuffed animals, and they're always sick. And a lot of times that they are, the stuffed animals are dying, or they're very sick and they're having to go to the hospital. And she's like, it's the same thing over and over. And I was like, first, we have to remember her daughter's in first grade. I said, first, it's great that she's being able to act that out via play, because what she's trying to do is figure out the world around her. But what is happening is she doesn't have a script for another answer in her brain. So she keeps doing the same thing over and over. The animals are sick and having to go to the hospital, and sometimes they die. I said, one of the things you could do, or have her sister do, is have a stuffed animal come in and be the doctor that gives them medicine so they can recover. Because she doesn't have that script to change the story, and she's trying to work through that. So constant reminding and just being aware of how they're playing, what they're saying, if their behavior is changing. I know about 2 weeks ago with my son, we were sailing through, and I was like, this is awesome. I like this. I don't like the situation we're in, but the change was really good for my family. We had slowed down. We were spending a lot of time together. We had some new rituals we had put in place. And then all of a sudden we had a few days of really tough behavior. And finally I said, what is it, buddy? What's wrong? What's worrying you? And he spewed out all the worries that he had. And we really had to have that conversation about how we're doing everything to keep him safe, how we're doing all the right things, and why all these things are in place. And some of the facts that, yes, it's scary, but a lot of people get better. We had to have those conversations with him. My fear is that not a lot, or there may be some parents and there may be some stakeholders that don't know how to handle those conversations with our kids. So is there a way as a school that maybe we can make a little 2-minute video that says, hey, when your kids ask questions, here are some pointers for how to answer their questions? Or maybe we can make a 45-second video that says, are you noticing your kids play looks like this? Maybe you can support them by adding in some more facts so they understand what's happening. I know parents are struggling. We're asking them to organize schooling, honestly, during a crisis at home. We're not even asking them to homeschool. We're asking them to, and I'm sure you've seen those on social media or in different places. This is totally different than what any of us have ever done. And I know a lot of parents are struggling. They too are at that bottom of the Maslow's hierarchy. And they don't, I've seen people say, I don't know how to be a teacher. This math is hard. I'm not sure how to do that. And talking with my former coworkers at the school that I taught with, a lot of them are even having trouble figuring out how to schedule their weeks or how to organize the schoolwork for their kids, and they're feeling overwhelmed. I know each county is different. Some counties are doing packets, some counties are doing Schoology, some counties are having scheduled Zoom meetings. It's different everywhere. But a lot of that executive functioning is falling on our parents or our kids. And the kids that are falling on often are the kids that are struggling to unpack their book bags. They're struggling at school. They're struggling to keep their desk clean. And now we're asking them to organize all this work without the support of teachers or aides in the room. So finding a way to kind of scaffold this for our parents, first recognizing, number one, that this is hard, but Erin was one of my coworkers at Lost Creek Elementary. I think she's actually on this call. She made this weekly school work checklist for her parents and showed it in the last webinar as well, because I think this is really something we need to be thinking about when it comes to supporting our parents with what they're asking to do. So she took the work that she has assigned. Harrison County is using Schoology, and it's almost like an online agenda book. This is all the stuff that needs to be turned in on certain days of the week, but she made this visual for them and sent them out via Schoology. And my understanding is that she heard from a lot of our parents saying, thank you, this makes it easier to look at and make sure that I'm getting all these things done throughout the week. And that's just a little almost executive functioning scaffolding for our parents to make it easier to think about what all is being expected of them and organizing it for them. a lot of our brains, this is second nature. And this is automatically what we do, because the first week, this is what I did for Noah. I looked at it and I said, there's no way we can organize this unless we're writing it down. And we had an extra planner that he had already filled out. And what we did was we wrote down what needed to be done each day. My goal is that this is a time where eventually he can begin to look at it and assign different work to each day. But this was a game changer for how we were setting up our weeks and how we were organizing. So even printing off or allowing parents to have access to finding them a free planner page where maybe they can either write it on paper, similar to that. I know Noah's school shared that on their social media of how different teachers were doing that, and I shared a picture of this as well. And there was a lot of parents who were like, I didn't think of that, I'm going to try that, I'm going to go do that now. And I think just trying to think of what do we do naturally that are little tips and hints that we can give to parents so they can be more successful with what we're asking them to do. I already had a little spiel about socialization, but it's so important. Our kids are missing each other. I'm missing my friends. I'm missing my family. And they work through emotions differently with their same age peers. Also, be creative. Online resources. Sometimes there's some libraries. There's a lot of gyms that are doing online activities, Zoom meetings, FaceTime play dates. I can tell you when I started those Zoom meetings with my son and his friends, that those early moments were really awkward. Third graders aren't the best conversationalists, and I really needed to have some small activities to have that set up for them. We played Would You Rather. So would you rather be a unicorn or a dragon? And they would each answer, and that would spark a conversation that would last a little bit. And then when it got quiet and they were all staring at each other, I would give them another question, and they were able to have another conversation spawn off of that. So even providing kind of that structure to parents or even to your teachers about how you can structure that time together so they can learn how to have conversations via Zoom meetings, or how to have play dates. My best friend, she's been having play dates, and they're doing, they've done bingo. So they set up a bingo board just on a notebook paper, and a parent is calling out bingo numbers for them. And then another thing that they do is a kid just says a word like soup, and everybody takes turns drawing the soup, and then they show each other the pictures and they laugh hysterically. So it's really being creative with how you're allowing them to have time with one another. And I think that's an important thing to think about, and something that we also might need to scaffold for parents or even our teachers, a way to allow them to be together and play. We also need to think about emotional wellness. I was recently listening to a webinar by Heather Forbes, and it was for parents really, and she says kids can only be regulated by regulated adults. Now, if you've been in any of our trainings, we always say unregulated kids can't learn and unregulated teachers can't teach. Well, there's a lot of us walking around in this world right now that are in different levels of regulation. So making sure that we are doing the best we can for emotional wellness and supporting our parents for their emotional wellness right now. I've had many conversations where I'm assuring people that no one is failing right now. As long as you're social distancing, as long as you're doing the best you can to stay healthy, when it comes to schooling, when it comes to our work, when it comes to how our homes are being ran, as long as we're being safe, no one's failing right now, because this isn't written down for how this should go. But it's really important that we take care of ourselves and help others take care of themselves. And modeling these such behaviors our kids are going to come out of this with a lot of information about what we're doing to have emotional wellness for ourselves. So things like, I found that I've needed to take a break from the news cycle. I've needed to find new activities that take my mind off things and challenge my brain in different ways. We've been doing yoga around here, especially on those really stressful days. We'll pull up yoga on YouTube and we'll all do it. And then we'll collapse in giggles because none of us are good at it. And also teaching them about how to take care of your body. So deep breaths and having the opportunity to move and exercise. We know that movement is one of the best ways to bring back regulation in kids and adults. So the more that we can move, the more that we can exercise, the better it is for our emotional and physical wellness. And this is really the end of our PowerPoint, really the end of this webinar as well. But I just want to put this reminder out there that storms don't last forever. And I know that's hard to see from day to day. One of the things I really want you to think about is how you're going to take this information and share it with your staff. And then is there a way that you can make plans to send out little reminders or little lessons to your parents about each of these different things, each of these different subjects? I think that it's important to remember that a lot of us, and I just said it, a lot of us are in unknown territory where we don't know what we're doing. And I think the more we can think about how we can support our parents, the better off we all will be in this situation. We do have, this is the second in a series. So next week on Tuesday, we are going to have a webinar about acknowledgments in distance learning or in remote learning. The one after that is trauma-informed practices in looking out for our most vulnerable students. That will be on next Thursday at 11. And the following Tuesday, I believe that's the 28th, it's going to be about self-care for educators and everybody at this moment in time. But we're really excited about the content that we're being able to provide you all, and we're hoping that it's helpful. And also, I've said it to a whole bunch of different people, but we're learning as well. So if you can think of some ways that you would want to be supported by us, let us know. If you have any ideas for other webinars we can do. Our behavior support specialists are also working with schools via Teams, via Zoom, via Skype, in many different ways. So, and there's already some planning happening for what to do when we go back to school and what PBIS might look like in the next year. So if you are a member of a school team and you would like to have those meetings, you can shoot us an email and we will get back to you with how we can support you. But we're here. We appreciate you all attending.
For more information regarding the West Virginia PBIS project, you can go to www.wvpbis.org. For more information regarding the West Virginia Behavior Mental Health Technical Assistance Center, you can go to www.marshall.edu/BMHTAC. For the most current information regarding the West Virginia Department of Education's response to the COVID-19 crisis, you can go to www.wvde.us/COVID-19. This site also has resources for families as well as educators.